Forget the tentacles. And remember, cosmic horror doesn't need stars. Sometimes the void stares back from beneath the waves. Stasis Bone Totem is not just inspired by Lovecraft, it understands him. That makes this game far more horrifying than the action-adventure we're used to. By understanding HBL and his work, it understands the darkest parts of humanity and how easily they unravel when confronted by the unknown. This is not the Brotherhood's first game. In fact, this isn't even the first game in the Stasis series, but the third. Stasis, Cain, and now Bone Totem. All three share the same isometric viewpoint, puzzles that are both challenging and fulfilling when they're solved, and an atmosphere most big-budget games can only dream of replicating. The first game set up the bleak tone, telling the story of a man waking up from stasis and desperately searching for his missing wife and daughter. The second game, the little-known free sequel, Cain, focused on a pregnant woman waking up on what was supposed to be a routine appointment, only to find herself in a nightmare. Bone Totem stands out as the odd man out here, thanks to its complete change in setting. We aren't among the stars and the potential great old ones. We're in the ocean, with a heavier biotech focus. This isn't about Cthulhu, it's about insignificance, grief, mutilation, and madness, in the face of knowledge humans were never meant to have. Let's start with the ocean itself. Lovecraft's mythos is filled with stories, some his, some written by others in his universe, that focus on the ocean and what lurks beneath the surface. The one that most people think of first is the Call of Cthulhu, and good reason. It inspired a tabletop RPG, countless games, and even the Alone in the Dark series. My personal favorite.
I don't want to fucking hear about how I didn't play the right goddamn version of this stupid fucking game. Because now, there is a video recording of me playing the PS2 version, the Wii version, and the updated PS3 version. I have put more goddamn effort into trying this game than fans have actually playing it.
H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu isn't just a monster story. It's a slow, creeping realization that humanity isn't at the top of the cosmic food chain. The horror isn't simply Cthulhu itself. It's the revelation that something this ancient and incomprehensible exists, that our lives are insignificant next to it, and that we were never in control. Another story with a similar theme is Dagon. It's framed as a dying man's journal entry. A World War I survivor stranded at sea ends up on a slimy, shifting piece of land risen from the ocean floor. There he witnesses something ancient crawling in the depths, a towering aquatic monstrosity that defies explanation. But the true horror isn't the monster itself, it's what the survivor now knows. What he saw was just a glimpse, a scout, a fragment of something older than humanity, and now that he's seen it, he can never go back. The knowledge itself is the infection. Thirdly, let's glance at the Shadow Over Innsmouth. The story follows a man investigating a decaying fishing town where the locals are secretive, hostile, and not quite right. As he digs deeper, he uncovers a town dark, packed with the Deep Ones, ancient amphibious beings from the ocean's depths. In exchange for wealth and longevity, the townspeople agree to interbreed with these creatures. The kicker? The narrator discovers he's one of them, a descendant in this grotesque lineage. The horror isn't the fish people themselves, it's the realization that the horror is inside him and that he's already transforming. How do these stories connect to Bone Totem? Their DNA is woven into the game's design. Like Call of Cthulhu, the protagonists piece together the story through survivors' logs and scattered articles. Like Dagon, the true damage isn't from the physical trauma they endure, and they certainly do endure quite a bit, but the mental anguish of what they uncover. Innsmouth asks a harder question than the first two. What happens when our humanity gets overwritten? In Lovecraft tale, it's a physical change, growing gills, sprouting alien features. In Bone Totem, it's more insidious, a subtraction of what makes us human, eroded mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as the story unfolds. And in all three stories, and Bone Totem as well, it all comes back to the ocean. In Lovecraft's world, the ocean isn't just deep, it's unknowable. The true horror doesn't come from the monsters themselves, but from what they reveal. We are fragile, irrelevant, doomed to learn that things we were never meant to know. Stasis Bone Totem understands that and drags us screaming into the deep to prove it. Forbidden knowledge is another cornerstone of Lovecraft horror. As much as I'd love to comment on all of the stories that encompass this idea, which includes works from the extended mythos like Red Goat, Black Goat, I'll stick to Lovecraft's own work or we'll be here all day. Let's focus on two stories, At the Mountains of Madness and the Dunwich Horror. In At the Mountains of Madness, Lovecraft is at his most clinical and his most terrifying. An Antarctic expedition uncovers the ruins of a city older than humanity, buried in ice. Inside, they find carvings revealing Earth's secret history, that humans were an accident, and the ancient alien beings known as the Elder Things were here long before us, and may not be gone. What starts as an archaeological mission becomes a cosmic autopsy, exposing the insignificance of mankind. The further the team digs, the more they realize they're not explorers, they're intruders in a world that was never meant for them. If Mountains is about the past, Dunwich is about legacy, a family line gone very, very wrong. The story takes place in a remote New England town where a woman gives birth to something half human, half alien. Her child, Wilbur, seeks access to arcane knowledge to summon his unseen brother, who turns out to be a gigantic, invisible entity terrorizing the countryside. The twist? Wilbur and the creature are both the spawn of the cosmic entity, Yog-Sothoth. The horror isn't just what's outside, it's what's been inherited. At the Mountains of Madness shows us what happens when we dig too deep. The Dunwich Horror shows what happens when something digs into us. And Stasis Bone Totem, both ideas collide. Humanity as an intruder, and humanity as the experiment. This is where Bone Totem and Lovecraft overlap most vividly. Identity loss and mutilation. Lovecraft didn't rely on gore to get his point across, though Bone Totem occasionally indulges in modern blood and guts. It uses it sparingly. The physical horror mostly comes from the bodies of others, the bystanders whose fate you discover along the way. These are the people who endured physical trauma so intense they are barely recognized as human. In The Shadow Out of Time, a man named Peasley blacks out for years and returns with memories that aren't his. Eventually, he uncovers the truth. During his blackout, his consciousness was swapped with an alien being from Earth's distant past, the great race of Yith, who preserve knowledge by swapping minds with people across time and space. In The Thing on the Doorstep, the narrator recounts how his best friend, Edward Derby, marries a strange woman named Asenath. Over time, Edward's behavior becomes increasingly unstable, his voice not always his own. The twist? Asenath is actually her dead father, using occult sorcery to permanently possess Edward's body. Yet again, Bone Totem carries both of these horrors. Moses' story is particularly impactful. His journey from an obedient AI companion to a character who understands loss and cruelty is devastating.
Moses. We have that in common, my friend. You must get the escape suit. Put it in QSD.
Feeling less strong, less brave.
You must try. Must.
I cannot move.
You can. You must. All it requires is everything. I know you would give everything for her.
For her?
Thank you, Moses. Thank you for this ending.
Everything.
And Mac and Charlie themselves are altered, mentally and emotionally, by the trauma they endure. The Shadow Out of Time shows us our minds can be stolen. The Thing on the Doorstep shows that our bodies can be hijacked, and in Stasis Bone Totem, those ideas fuse into something terrifying. A world where identity is just a code, and nobody's home behind the eyes. In Bone Totem, you play as 3 characters, each carrying their own struggles and heartbreak. And the journey forces each of them to confront the deepest wounds from their lives, wounds that were never fully healed. Mac is a stoic salvage diver. He's visibly hurting the most. The loss of his daughter weighs heavy on him, and it's clear he blames himself. He throws himself into his work as a distraction, emotionally detaching from his wife and blaming himself at the first opportunity. By the end, Mac has been put through the ringer, confronting not just personal trauma, but the cruelty of mankind through the Kane Corporation. He's broken, yet there's a glimmer of hope in his final moments. A hope tragically lost to Charlie by then.
Feels like forever since I just stopped moving. Since I was just still. You don't have to be sorry, Charlie. She's right. She can be anything she wants now. Thanks to you. I love you both. I love you both.
Charlie, Mac's wife, grieves in the opposite way. Instead of disconnecting, she fights for control over every situation, even if it strains her relationship with Mac. By the end, she's hardened and hollow, clinging desperately to the memory of her child as her last tether to humanity. She's willing to get her daughter back at any cost without realizing that cost may be everything else. Moses, the AI bear, begins as comic relief, an obedient tool and the former best friend of Mac and Charlie's daughter, Hope. By the end, Moses has been exposed to the same cruelties, the same heartache. He understands loss now. And, in a way, he becomes the emotional core of the story. Every character in Bone Totem begins the game carrying wounds, lost, guilt, and secrets they can't fix. By the end, those wounds are ripped open. The ocean doesn't just take lives in this game. It takes faith, identity, and the belief you'll ever come back whole. Lovecraft tapped into these same themes. The Outsider shows us the terror of realizing you're no longer human. The Whisper in the Darkness shows how easy your body and your identity can be taken from you. Stasis Bone Totem ties both fears together. You don't just risk dying in the abyss. You risk coming back as something you can't recognize. True cosmic horror is hard to pull off in gaming. It isn't just about monsters jumping out of the dark. It's about realizing the dark doesn't care about you. It's the fear that the universe is vast, indifferent, and full of truths we're not equipped to handle. Lovecraftian horror is the storytelling framework built around that fear. It's isolation, the forbidden knowledge, the ancient forces, the slow unraveling of the human mind. It's the cults, the journals, the things lurking in the deep. But more than that, it's about how we break when we brush up against the incomprehensible. Most games struggle with this because players want empowerment, a win state, a victory they earned. This game puts something different out there. You're reactionary. You respond to what's happening around you instead of shaping it with your will. You're never a major force in the world, and that's the point. Some other games, Soma, Scorn, and Amnesia try to fit this mold with varying degrees of success. Bone Totem fully commits. It understands dread and despair and wears them like a second skin. It doesn't need the cults, the tentacles, or unseen monsters. The horror is a feeling, something in your nerves and your soul. Thematically, Bone Totem fits in the same way Killer 7 does. In the end, it's not the monsters that haunt us, it's the truth that we find in the pieces of ourselves we lose along the way. This game doesn't just borrow Lovecraftian style, it thrives in its spirit. Maybe horror games are finally moving towards skimming off the cliches of the source material. I think this is one of the new champions of horror, and its Lovecraftian subgenre. I'm Adam the Horror Historian. Thank you for watching my video on Bone Totem. This is a little bit more daunting of a video. I feel like I've said that 2 in a row now. Next time, we're actually diving into the worst of the worst again. This will be episode 3 of season 3. And to make it kind of special, we're actually doing a sequel to one of the winners. Until then, stay scared, stay curious.